I've been doing this job for 10 years, and I don't think I've been recommended any movie more than Obsession. This is a horror movie that came out this year, and since it did, I have been receiving a flood of DMs and notifications asking about my opinion on it. And I'll say, when this happens, when I get recommended a piece of media this much, it makes me arch my spine a little bit. I kind of tilt my head and look at it and go, can it really be as wild as people are saying it is? And I think that's compounded by the fact that I have watched a lot of horror movies and a lot of really fucked up stuff that I think even your average horror enjoyer might be like, whoa, that's a bit much for me now. And so when I keep hearing things like, oh, this movie is so crazy, I couldn't believe what happened, there is a little, and I'll be real here, kind of pretentious, arrogant ass part of me that goes, we'll see. And when I heard the premise of Obsession, I was a little skeptical. It's this idea that a guy likes this girl, and so he casts a magic spell on her or makes a wish to make her fall in love with him, and things start going wrong. And immediately I felt like, okay, the premise is like, it's a little bit corny. You know, I'm not quite sure I can see how this leads to like a super like shocking or crazy or impactful film, at least not in a way that I haven't seen before. And yeah. And that was the attitude I had going in to see this movie in the cinema last week. As the lights went down, I was kind of wondering what it could be about this movie that was making people so insane over it. And 1 hour and 45 minutes later, as I am trying to comprehend what I just experienced, I looked over to my friend and noticed that she was in tears because that was the experience of this movie. And yeah, I gotta say, this is one of the most shocking movies I have seen in a long, long time. And I think a huge part of that is how the film handles its concept. So, Obsession is a silly idea. It's a silly concept for a movie, but I think the movie is very, very aware of that, and it knows when to crank up the absurdity, but it also knows when to just let you melt in mind alteringly tense situations. But I think there's like a very particular way that it handles its like idea that really elevates this film into like a kooky fucked up horror movie into something else that I kind of just really loved. See, the whole idea here is, like I said, you got this guy Bear, and he is in love with this girl Nikki, and you can kind of see it. Like, Nikki is fun and charming, and she's very like spiky and makes fun of him, and you can see like there is a little bit of a chemistry there. But people have different reads on this, but personally when I was watching it, I felt like there wasn't anything romantic on Nikki's side. She really cares about Bear as a friend, but doesn't seem to have much interest in him romantically. And there's even this moment where she asks him, do you have feelings for me? But there's a sense of like exhaustion from it, like, oh, not this fucking shit again, you know? But I've seen people argue otherwise, I've seen the actors kind of say otherwise, but to me, that's how it read. And so Bear has this really super awkward encounter where he doesn't know how to answer that question, and he's like, oh, fuck, and he breaks this wishing will-o-wisp, being like, I wish that she loved me more than anyone in this world. And from that point, Nikki starts acting differently. She starts becoming obsessed. See, that's probably why they called the film that, I would wager. And it starts off, and it's more she just feels intense. Like, I have been in situations where people have acted the way Nikki is acting towards Bear, towards me, and I was like, oh, fuck, yeah, been there, buddy. That's pretty rough. And I think what the film does so like masterfully in its first like half an hour is really like walking this line between things being okay and things not being okay. Like, one moment Nikki is being like super strange and like just very kind of unnerving, and the next we're getting like pancake montages of the two enjoying their life together. And so like you're kind of watching being like, okay, this parts of this feel okay and parts of this really don't. But then as the movie goes on, of course, like, Nikki's obsession grows, and she just wants Bear so badly, and she starts to express that Bear doesn't care for her the way she cares about him, and this is where, like, the unease really comes into it. And I would say a huge part of that unease is Nikki's actor, Indy Navarrete, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing that. It's more than just the way she talks, it's the way she moves throughout some of these scenes. There's something so, like, just uncanny and frightening about how she kind of like walks and her body. I kind of have a feeling that they might have done a few scenes in this by recording her doing an action backwards and then playing the footage backwards, because it just feels that unnatural and strange. And she is like really genuinely frightening. Like, if this movie has a monster, it is her. But I think the really brilliant thing about this movie, and the moments that I started to feel like, okay, this is more than just a silly fun monster movie, which is like, there's nothing wrong with that. The moment it started to become something else is this moment early on where they're like, it's very early into like the obsession spell, and they're making out and they're having a great time, and Nikki backs up and she's like, whoa, what are we doing? And then she's back into being obsessed, and you're like, whoa, what the fuck was that? And as you're watching the movie, there's these moments of like clarity that Nikki has where she kind of realizes that something is really wrong. And the more you watch, the more you start to realize that the real Nikki is kind of trapped in this body. And it starts becoming this horror story, not about like this guy who is being haunted by this obsessive girlfriend, but this complete loss of autonomy within Nikki, and how she has kind of been contorted into this other fantasy of this dude Bear. And as this presence take over, the fake Nikki's actions become more and more frightening. There's a moment where Bear wakes up and she's just watching him in his sleep. Like, she is standing over in a corner, just dead still, just watching him. And the way the film is like lit and shot, you don't see her properly. She never emerges from the shadows properly, and it creates this like tremendously uncanny, unnerving feeling. Like, it's nearly Uncanny Valley shit, except it's not quite, because it's more fear through like obscurity, but it sets off that same sense. And there's so many scenes like that, to the point that like it is very late into this film before anything violent even happens. But by that point, I was already strung the fuck out on like just tension and anxiety, and just like deeply disturbed by what I was seeing, to the point that like when things actually do turn violent, it kind of just feels like a logical progression of the escalation this possessed Nikki character has been on. I don't want to give away too many like spoilers here, and I'm not going to, but there was something that I thought was interesting about the ending, or specifically like what the ending wasn't, okay? So throughout the story, there's this other character. I think her name was Laura. And Laura is this girl who works with Nikki and Bear, and she actually has feelings for Bear, like non-magical feelings for Bear. And as the film goes on, he kind of confides in her what's happening with Nikki and how afraid he is and all this kind of stuff. And you can feel them two start to grow closer. But what I thought was interesting is that Laura likes Bear for who he is without magic. And I couldn't shake the feeling after I'd seen this movie that if this film was made 20 years ago, it would have ended like this, right? Laura and Bear would have been running through the forest as Nikki chased them with a fucking knife or something like that. And then at some point, they would kill her in self-defense and then get to be together. And then the stinger would be that Laura starts to become obsessed with Bear. That would have been how that film ended 20 years ago. How it ends now, it ends so differently than that. And what I would say, and I think this is really what like makes the film special, the film has a tremendous sense of empathy towards Nikki. It never lets you forget the fact that she is someone who has lost all bodily autonomy, and it also never lets you forget the fact that Bear, like, while not like objectively evil in the beginning of the movie, is very clearly someone who has let his fantasy of this other person overwrite who she actually is. And that, to me, ultimately became the really haunting part of the movie. Not even like the creepy shit Nikki is doing, but that Bear could look at this real person in his actual life and be like, I want the fantasy. And like, I think the fact the film can operate on those two levels and have them both be so effective, that's why this thing has become such an absolute fucking monster. And when I say a monster, this film's budget was about $750,000. You never would think that from how it looks, and that's in part to how great the camera compositions is, the art direction. Visually, this looks like a way more expensive movie than what it is. But let me check the current gross here, because it is completely insane. Okay, the current gross of Obsession is $290 million. That means if you invested $1 in this film, you would be getting a return of nearly $300. Actually, yeah, just $300. And look, what I'll say is, like, when I talk about budget, I don't ever take budget as any kind of, like, qualitative statement on how good a film is or isn't. But it is interesting in looking at film as a business, and particularly in looking at the kind of films that are going to be made in the next 3 years. And what makes me happy about this is that you are going to see, I feel like, a lot of smaller, weirder, low-budget horror films being made in this vein, and using this film as like an example of how it can work, which can really open the door for like unheard of directors, unheard of actors, new ideas in the horror space, and I think that's genuinely really exciting. The downside of this is because the film did have a small budget and has seen so much success, that people who worked on the film have barely seen any of that. So take the art director, Sally Choi. She was paid a total of $6,741 for her work on Obsession. And like, this was weeks and weeks of work. This would have been like a really intense shoot, and it sucks that, like, I mean, I bet if you leveled out all her hours out, I bet she barely makes minimum wage on this. And it sucks that she does not get compensated for the success of the movie. And the director responded, and I didn't think his response was great. It was kind of like, yeah, I hope the crew sees more opportunities. But I really think in events like this, there should be some kind of like profit share in place so that people can actually benefit from like the hard work they did. And like, an art director is not a small part of a movie. You are a key fucking player in that role. And unfortunately, that just kind of sucks. And I really hope that kind of stuff gets better. But in terms of like recommending Obsession as a horror film, I absolutely no reservations. I think the only way I would say you shouldn't watch it is that Obsession borders on the subgenre of horror movie that I call like day ruiners. And if you are not okay with having your day kind of fucked up a little bit, this might be one that I would avoid. Like, it is a very tense, difficult film to watch in a lot of ways, and like, it's a lot of fun. The film knows when to get like silly with its premise, and especially like in the final act there's moments of absolute absurdity. But this is an upsetting film about an upsetting subject matter, and I think for particular people it's going to be really difficult to watch, so do keep that in mind going in. But in terms of my feelings on it, this is maybe the best film I've seen this year. I would say on my 7-point scale, it's an easy 5, bordering on a 6. Maybe if I watch it again and enjoy it, I would push it up to a 6. But yeah, absolutely. Okay, that is all. Till next time.